There are only three alternatives for me: to be arrested, to be killed, or to be victorious. And I tell those scumbags, I will never go to jail.
Kia ora. My name's Devin Pike, and this is your Daily Spiel. Just then was a clip of Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro addressing a crowd last year, openly refusing to leave office should he lose re-election in late 2022. Bolsonaro is inspired by former American President Donald Trump in terms of his far-right policies, but also by his strategies to cling to power, such as frequent lying and sowing doubt about the fairness of elections. If he loses, many fear Bolsonaro will rally his supporters and stage an attack to forcefully hold on to power, similar to the Capitol riot in January last year after Trump lost re-election. So here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, you might be thinking, who cares, right? All this is happening overseas, and though we've seen a rise in disinformation and anti-government speech in the past couple years, democracy seems pretty intact. So why do threats to democracy over there matter here? Today, I'm going to tell you a bit about how figures like Trump or Bolsonaro have risen to power, how trends in far-right politics in the US have repeated in other countries, how they've repeated here, and could continue to be repeated. Before we get too into the thick of it, let me share with you a bit of personal history. Nearly 18 years ago, I left the US and immigrated to New Zealand. I was 6 at the time and have spent most of my life here. As a Kiwi, an American, and now a journalist, I've paid a lot of attention to politics happening both in New Zealand and in the US over the past few years. For most of my life, and especially since Trump began his run for president in 2015, I've had tons of people here comment to me about how bad things seem in the US and how people there don't have as many freedoms as we do here. And while I don't disagree with them, I've noticed that when people talk to me about fascism or extremist politics here, it's almost always outside of Aotearoa, as if such things could never happen here. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There's 3 common trends I've seen globally with rises in far-right politics: a lack of voter turnout, a lack of trust in governments, and widespread disinformation. Turning up to the polls is key in getting people elected who represent your values. However, non-extremist candidates are less likely to win when turnout is low or voting is made more difficult for some. In September 2022, Italy elected Giorgia Meloni as prime minister after her party, Brothers of Italy, won the most votes at 26%. The party has roots in far-right and fascist policies, making Meloni Italy's most right-wing prime minister since World War II. The election had a turnout of 64% compared to 73% in the 2018 election, a 9-point drop. In the US, a Supreme Court decision in 2013 made it easier for states to make their own election rules, resulting in a rise in voter intimidation by 2016, mostly towards Black Americans and other minorities who largely did not support Trump. The election, which Trump won, saw only 55% of voters show up. Aside from the 2008 election, this was the lowest turnout in 16 years. Distrust and instability in governments and democratic systems can push voters towards more extreme outsider candidates, and it's a factor that many far-right leaders take advantage of. In both Italy and Brazil, Meloni and Bolsonaro came into power at times when their country's governments were unstable. Italy's former Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, was a left-wing leader who resigned 2 months before the 2022 election, after a government crisis brought down confidence in his leadership. In late 2016, Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff, also a left-wing leader, was impeached and removed from office after breaking budgetary laws. 2 years later, Bolsonaro won his election bid with 55% of the vote. 7 months before the 2020 US election, then President Trump began spreading lies about fraud being common in mail-in ballots, a method of voting chosen mostly by Joe Biden voters during the COVID pandemic. On election night in November 2020, after months of sowing doubt in the fairness of the election and before a winner was declared, Trump said this:
"This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation.
These lies would ultimately lead to the Capitol riot 2 months later, a failed attempt by Trump supporters to keep him in power. At the beginning of this episode, you heard Jair Bolsonaro tap into similar ideas about the fairness of elections before they happen. Like Trump, he's declared himself the winner in advance and has said the only way you could lose is if the election is rigged. These are blatant lies, but they're built on top of a larger system of lies that, overall, paint far-right leaders as revolutionaries fighting against so-called oppressors, such as left-wing politicians and international bodies like the WHO. This disinformation is believed by millions, and many are willing to act on these false ideas, whether it be spreading the lies to other people or harming those who disagree with them. Okay, so that's a whole lot happening overseas, but what's been seen here? Well, recently, we had the 2020 local body elections, which saw a slew of far-right extremist candidates and a staggeringly low turnout of 36%. Though no far-right candidates won their elections, the country overall saw local governments shift towards the right. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a rise in conspiracy theories, anti-government figures, and fake news. In recent years, one of the most prominent figures and peddlers of false info has been Brian Tamaki of Destiny Church. Tamaki founded the anti-government movement the Freedom and Rights Coalition, hosted several anti-mandate protests across the country, and was a leader during the COVID mandate protests at Parliament in early 2022. I spoke with Stephen Judd, a representative of Fact Aotearoa, an organization that debunks conspiracies and exposed many extreme candidates in the local body election. He shared with me some of the most common themes he's seen among conspiracy theorists in New Zealand.
At the most fundamental level, they rest on an idea that our government and institutions in our society are corrupt and broken, and that hidden forces and hidden players are steering events to the detriment of ordinary people. And they often appeal to international forces, and people use words like globalists, and they allude to big pharma, and they might name specific billionaires, but the common idea is that very rich, powerful people are on the down low, lying about vaccines, lying about climate change, lying about things that are part of modern politics to achieve some sort of sinister outcome.
Judd says that many Kiwis go online and look overseas for models and explanations for major issues like climate change and COVID. They'll mostly use what he calls the English-speaking internet, which is dominated by American voices and ideas. He says that some American conspiracies then take root in New Zealand, but they evolve and become more localized.
So climate change denial in New Zealand is not focused on protecting the oil and gas industries. It is around agriculture and methane emissions from ruminant animals, and secondarily around transport policy and densification and the property values of homes owned by older people and the infrastructure that gets built and where it's built. There is a very significant Māori element here. I mean, for very obvious reasons, Māori as a whole don't have any reason to trust or love the New Zealand state. Anyone who knows about New Zealand history understands that, and so there's some really powerful appeals being made in that community to the hurt that it's experienced.
Much like recent far-right movements in the US and Brazil, anti-government stances have become localized in Aotearoa. More people than ever hold these dangerous views, and platforms that house these beliefs have gained more attention. One type of far-right extremism that's been seen here for more than 15 years is the sovereign citizen movement, who are inspired by similar groups in the US and Canada. Basically, many sovereign citizens believe laws don't apply to them unless they give consent. In the wake of the pandemic, these kinds of views have only gotten more popular. Far-right views like this have given rise to media outlets like Counterspin Media, which is comparable to InfoWars in the US. Founders Kelvin Alp and Hannah Spearer have been open about their extreme views and the violent steps they're willing to take against the government. Here's some clips of them from the program during the Parliament protests.
So if the military command is watching this, and I guarantee you they will be,
we'll be happy for it to be in your safe hands, because the criminals that occupy Parasite Palace, laughingly called the Beehive, need to be gone.
To resist, of course, this tyrannical government, which is not going to stop. It's a system, of course, as we all know, just going around the globe. And, at this point, it's slavery versus freedom.
So this might sound pretty doom and gloom, but the good news is there's things you can do. If you're listening to this, odds are you're 18 or about to turn 18. That means you can and should vote in next year's election. Young people often have the lowest turnout in any election. Regardless of who you vote for, what matters is that you take advantage of democracy and make your voice heard. It's also worth improving your media literacy to help you understand if media or news is fake or biased, if it uses certain language to influence your thinking, and if interviewees are qualified to be talking about certain things. Stephen Judd explains how media literacy in Finnish schools were beneficial and could possibly benefit Aotearoa.
Obviously, for decades, they had to deal with propaganda from first the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation trying to destabilize the government. So they have had a long-standing program of media literacy education in schools, and a kind of almost national scale compact. And that seems to have really worked. Whether you can adopt something like that in a more diverse society that doesn't have a clear external threat is a good question.
Finally, it helps to always be on the lookout for misinformation, which are unintentional lies, and disinformation, which are deliberate lies. Whether it's on social media, from a news outlet, or it's something your auntie said, never take new bombshell info at face value. Look for sources, see what other people are saying about it, and don't just read headlines. If there's an article, make sure you actually look at it. Through actions like these, you, the next generation of voters, can help to preserve democracy in Aotearoa. You can help keep lies and extremism out of politics. You can help keep others informed, and you can make your voices heard. I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes from American political advocate Ralph Nader. If you're not turned on to politics, politics will turn on you. Ngā mihi. Thanks for listening.